Let's go to Tel Aviv now. We're joined by the host of the Israel Daily News podcast, Shanna Fuld. Shanna, thank you for your time tonight. We do finally have three names now. Is there any word that this ceasefire will soon come into effect after its delay?
Yes. So what I've understood is that there was a holdup this morning in which the Israeli government put out a notice saying that they were going to continue their military operations until Hamas came around and gave that list. And then there was a follow-up notification saying that the list came in and that the deal is moving ahead.
The claim, of course, from Hamas was that this was held up by some sort of technical issue. I'm not sure that anyone particularly believes that. It would seem to me that Hamas is seeing exactly how far they can push Israel on this deal. Do you agree?
I would agree. This has been happening throughout the entire time. And if you heard from the Secretary, Antony Blinken, in an interview that he did a couple of weeks ago, he noted that anytime the U.S. showed any weakness or any criticism of Israel, that Hamas took advantage of that. And so I think that it's really important for the U.S. and Israel to stand tough together in order that this showdown come to an end. Otherwise, it's just going to continue to roll out, in which Hamas is going to push and push and push, try to take advantage. Any weakness here in the Middle East, this is something I like to talk about a lot. I come from the United States. I was born and raised in New York City. I've been here for 6 years. Weakness can be smelled in this region for miles and miles. And the language of the Middle East is power. It's taking, it's grabbing, it's speaking through power. And so any hint of diplomacy will be considered weakness in the eyes of Hamas. And so I would agree that it's important to move forward and for the U.S. to be a strong ally of Israel at this time through these negotiations.
Given there have been two impasses so far on the basis of this ceasefire deal, now of course in both instances Hamas has eventually relented, but given those two impasses, how much confidence do you have that this ceasefire will actually be played out for the full 44 odd days?
This is a really tricky question, and I think that any deal that requires a long length of time is not going to be a strong and stable one. I think that we're going to get through phase one. I also think that there's a lot of games being played by Hamas. They're trying to make it seem that they have hostages, that they're alive, when meanwhile there are rumors in the streets here in Israel that some of the names on this list are not even people that are with us today, and that Hamas is playing that game, that they're going to hand us back dead bodies when they are trying to make it look like they have our people alive. And so my confidence that this deal is going to be exercised through its full potential is low. However, I'm hopeful. And the sentiment here in Israel is that there's no way that this is going to hold throughout all of these months. That being said, I think we just have to keep our eyes focused on phase one.
What is the feeling on the ground? Is there an appetite for a ceasefire in order to get the hostages back over the idea of total destruction of Hamas?
So I'll tell you that there's different schools of thought. And one thing that I find fascinating is that these conversations come up at the Shabbat dinner table in the street. And one thing that I'm hearing from people is that they are afraid. If you remember, many of the people who assaulted the Israelis on October 7th were previously released Hamas prisoners. And I want to bring you to one particular story that really caught my attention last night, which was a tweet that came out from Hillel Fuld. He's a tech guru here in Israel, and he's really powerful around the world in the Israeli tech market. And his brother, Ari Fuld, by the way, no relation to me, but we know each other because we have the same last name. His brother, Ari Fuld, when I first arrived to this country in 2018, within the first 2 weeks of me being here, was shot dead by a terrorist. Now, that terrorist is on the list of prisoners, Hamas prisoners, to be released. And so Hillel put out a note saying that he did the research and he found the name of the terrorist who killed his brother. And that person, that individual who has served, mind you, less than 5 years, is going to be released. And so the sentiment here is, and I can also give you another example from yesterday. Out on the beach, I was out on the beach hearing people speak, and people were talking to me, and they said, "Oh well, there was a terror attack yesterday in Tel Aviv, right at the end of Shabbat, and a Palestinian terrorist came out with a knife. The surveillance video is super clear, and he's stabbing everyone sitting outside at a restaurant." And so someone was giving me the news, an individual. I have my phone off on Shabbat, and someone said, "You know that a terror attack just unfolded 5 minutes ago." And I said to him, "Wow, this is terrible." And he said to me, "Yeah, well, that person is going to be locked up, released, and we can expect to see him in the future," he said to me. So I think Israelis are bracing to see these prisoners again in the future, and for the lives of their neighbors, families to be potentially at risk in the future. So that's the feeling here.
And this is what we were talking about before, the idea of whether there is such a thing as a perfect deal. Now, I suppose in reality there is not. And the trade-off here is that in order to get 33 people back, you have to hand over people who will potentially become the next leaders of Hamas.
Absolutely. I just want to also say that there is a lot of excitement here, and people are doing what we call waiting with bated breath. Everyone is talking about holding their breath in WhatsApp chats, on the street. Everyone's holding their breath because we want our hostages home. You walk down the street, and there are images of people who are being held by Hamas all over. You go to the mall, you see it. We're constantly disturbed. We're constantly reminded. Everyone wants these hostages home. Just a couple days ago, I met someone having coffee, and he told me. I said to him, "I'm very stressed. I'm working all day. I'm working on this hostage deal during my reporting." And he said to me, "That's very interesting. I'm waiting for a close friend of mine, Natan O, to come home." And this is a man in his late 20s who was taken from the Nova Festival. So there are individuals here in Israel who are waiting for their families to come home. We're a country of 9 million. 9 million people is not a lot. You can imagine that so many individuals are connected personally to the war. They have someone in the army, they have someone in Gaza. And yes, there is a fear that these prisoners that are being released are going to return to their terrorist activities, not because it's a suspicion, because we have fact-based evidence that this is what has happened in the past.
Shanna Fuld, thank you so much for your insights tonight, joining us from Tel Aviv. Sky News UK is now reporting that the ceasefire has taken effect, so the deal is now in place after the release of those three names after the original posted time this evening.